This podcast is brought to you by WorkL, a platform helping people get happier at work. Find out more at workl.co. Work happier.
I definitely felt different. I saw people progress primarily, at least at that time, from a certain socioeconomic background. And I didn't come from that background. Finance can sound scary to people. It's not. People shouldn't feel they need to have a maths A level or an economics degree to get into it. My job is to create an environment where people will be the best versions of themselves. So I want talent to flourish. I will give time to pretty much anyone, but I won't do their job for them.
Welcome to the Happy WorkLife Podcast, where people with inspiring careers reflect on how happy they have been in their working lives. On this podcast, we hear from a range of people working in business, startups, science, academia, media, healthcare, fashion, and much more, and find out which roles gave them the most satisfaction and, importantly, what they have done to get happier at work. So, sit down with me, Mark Price, founder of WorkL, to help you get happier at work. WorkL is the platform where you can find a job in the happiest companies, take our happiness test, network, and get career support from experts, and much, much more. I'm delighted to be joined on this edition of the Happy WorkLife Podcast by Steven Cooper CBE. Now, if you ever want to know anything about the world of finance, there can be no better person to listen to than Steven. He's currently the Group CEO of Aldermore Bank. Before he joined Aldermore in 2021, Steven was the CEO of Hoare Co, which is, as some of you will know, the UK's oldest privately owned bank. Before that, he spent 30 years in Barclays doing a whole range of different jobs. And he's got experience not just in the UK and Europe, but also across other markets, including Africa and India and the USA. So he really does know everything. Steven is also the chairman of Experian UK and is a non-executive director of Cash Flows, a private equity-backed payment business. But he's also really passionate about social mobility and a real advocate for it. He chairs the Business in the Community Employment and Skills Leadership Team, is the co-chair of the Equality and Opportunity Coalition with former Cabinet Minister Justin Greening, and was formerly joint chair of the UK Government's Social Mobility Commission until 2021. So Steven, welcome to the podcast. You are a fantastically successful commercial financier. As our listeners will know, you've had an amazing career. But was there anything in your early years, in your childhood, in your school years, that led you to think that a career in finance was going to be the right thing for you?
Well, that sounds a very grand opening, Mark, but thank you for saying that. And thank you for having me on the podcast. It's an honour to be here. In the short answer, no. I went to a state comprehensive, as many people of my generation did and do. And I guess, look, it was fine. It was a school that had been threatened with closure. I had a real mix of people from different backgrounds, some from relatively affluent backgrounds, some from terribly underprivileged backgrounds, or people in care and so forth. So quite a mix, and getting that group to gel must have been a real challenge for the teachers at the time. I'm not sure I appreciated it at that time, but so there was quite a lot of disruption and unruly behaviour, and I think teachers did their best, but there was no real, at least what I don't recall seeing, any sort of aspiration for the children in the school. I didn't see any examples of role models being brought into the school to give inspiration or aspiration to the pupils. So I think I, like many, either did what their parents suggested or what they knew from family members or friends around them. And that was kind of the extent of it. And that's exactly what happened to me. I mean, no one in my family had been to university, for example. So there was that's probably the biggest characteristic. It wasn't necessarily a bad school, but as I say, as I think about it in hindsight, probably the teacher had a lot to juggle with that interesting mix of children. but there was no aspiration, no thought, and certainly for me, nothing real. What sort of career am I going to have? Frankly, it's about probably getting into the workplace and making sure that I could contribute financially at home.
And so did you have a dream when you were a kid? Did you dream of being I don't know, railway train driver or a astronaut, or can you remember any thoughts about?
No, the only thing I really enjoyed and I thought about doing, I loved metalwork, and I was good at metalwork. And I would make all these things, and I loved using the tools and the heat and the noise, and I really enjoyed that. But so yeah, I toyed unbelievably. I'm not sure I've said this to many people, but of being a blacksmith for a while. But I didn't know any commercial blacksmiths, and then I toyed a little bit with going into the navy, just because I enjoyed being on the sea and boating and stuff like that. But apart from that, absolutely no dreams. Which probably sounds quite boring, and I have no reason to say otherwise. But that was the extent of it.
And what did you like about school? Were you sporty? Were you academic? What was it about school that you remember enjoying or not enjoying?
I was reasonably academic. I mean, we weren't really pushed at all. I really enjoyed the subjects I enjoyed the most were, at least for me, I say metalwork I enjoyed. But I think that's because I'd never seen anything like that before. And I loved history. I loved learning about the past, what in my mind, what you could think about that for the future, what has shaped the country or the world, and interesting people in it. So I really loved history. I was reasonably good at things like maths and stuff like that. So I was solid at school, but there was no incentive to be the best of yourself. So you kind of sort of just got on with it to a degree. But and I guess some of that depending on whether there's some teachers who are more inspiring than others, and I probably was that with history. The teacher, just Mr. Hastings, I think his name was, and he was super passionate about it, and you couldn't help but feel part of it through him living what was in the past, and he brought it to life. And I see it with my own children now. They respond best to teachers who really get them and get the subject with passion and interest.
And how did you do in your exams?
I did okay, actually. I got 9 GCSE O levels, all sort of A's and B's. My wife always makes reference to that at least in one of my school reports that she read is that the teacher was surprised I got an O level GCSE, at least in that subject. So that says something either about me or sort of the environment at the time. But I did okay. But there was no real thought about going into A levels or university. It was actually getting into the workplace for a variety of reasons, some of which I've already mentioned. But and I don't regret that necessarily.
So let's wind back then. You've done very well. You've got 9 O levels, A's and B's. Where do you go to work? What takes you to your first job?
So a family member worked in Barclays at a relatively junior level. So I applied there and 1 or 2 other places for a job. I was interviewed by them. It was the only interview I ever did at that age anyway. And I got a job. And it was to join Barclays at the most junior level in the wonderful world of Holloway Road branch, right next door to the ladies' prison. I had the summer off, started there in September, whatever it was, and I loved it. I loved the people, real sort of no airs, no graces, no ego. It was just good people working hard, having fun, looking after customers, looking after each other. And I was the youngest one there by quite some time. I mean, at 16. So you couldn't drink, for example, or allegedly you couldn't drink, and things like that. But they took me under their wing. They looked after me, and I felt part of something. I felt part of a team, a group of people. I was learning about life, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
And just talk us through then your career, because from the sounds of it, you struck lucky. You found a job on day one that you enjoyed. Um, and you've explained already why you enjoyed it. It was the people and how you felt and what you were doing. So just talk us on then through your early years in work.
I mean, some of it was mind-numbingly boring. I mean, I was the post boy, and I mean, I wasn't very good. I mean, you had a franking machine, and you had to put the letters through this franking machine, and you had to weigh the letter of the parcel to work out how much the postage was. And I weighed a parcel, and I forgot to turn the franking machine back, so I got through the monthly postage budget in 2 days. So I wasn't very popular. So the work wasn't interesting at all, frankly. But I liked the people, and I loved the customers who I interacted with. Or if it's just going to the post office and delivering the post, I really enjoyed the interaction, the characters, and I found that interesting. Um, but I guess the moment came where after 3 or 4 years, sort of basic clerical manual jobs, I and three others were put onto the graduate program as non-graduates. We went through an interview process that I was put into. I didn't even know about it, didn't apply for it. Later, you could apply for it. And as far as I know, we were the first four non-graduates to go into the graduate program, which is hard actually, because we didn't fit the cohort of people who joined from university. We hadn't had that lived experience, and we didn't really know what to expect. And also, we'd been in the workplace for a while, so we had our own experiences, which are quite different to theirs. But it's interesting, 30 years later, or best part of 30 years later, of those four, two are still in the organisation at a very senior level. So, I mean, they must have done something right by strike. I mean, 50% hit rate's pretty good. And those two individuals, me being one of them, we certainly paid back that faith and more. So that was the big moment. And I guess really that comes down to someone, more than one person actually, and I know who they are, who's spotted the potential, for want of a better word, and they put us into a process, and they gave me support along the way, and that support, frankly, was an arm around the shoulder or a bit of encouragement, which I probably hadn't had. Certainly didn't have that at school, and that opened up a world of opportunity. And if there's one thing I learned, and one thing I definitely do now, it's to look. They gave to me, and I overtook them career-wise really quickly and far beyond that. But I never lost sight of who I was, who they were, and who helped me get into that position. Sometimes that was a friendly kick up the backside. Sometimes it's a bit of encouragement, support, advice. Sometimes it was opening up a door for me. But I've never forgotten that, and my job is to do that in return.
And so does that form kind of part of your leadership philosophy now, management philosophy? How do you bring that to bear in the organisation that you're in today?
So the way I think about that is probably in two ways, Mark. One is my job is to create an environment where people will be the best versions of themselves. So I want talent to flourish. Talent can mean different things to different people. It doesn't have to necessarily be the most senior or the best. And not everyone wants to get to the most senior position. But I do want people to come to work feeling they've got a meaningful, fulfilling day job, and that for at least part of their career, we will help them to advance, to develop, and to grow. And I feel very strongly about that. So that there's no matter where you are in the organisation, there's no door that is shut. We will give people an opportunity to experience something. It might just be for a day or half a day, not necessarily as a comment or a job, because not everyone has the capacity to do that or the ability to do that. But it is creating an environment where people can learn, where they can develop. And that plays out, for example, in apprenticeships in our organisation. So that's point one. And I think the second point is, certainly from my own personal point of view, I will give time to pretty much anyone, but I won't do their job for them. So if they've got a question or a query or a problem, great, let's talk about it, but I'm not going to solve it for them. So you come to the table with your thoughts and articulate those thoughts on why it is what you think it is. I may agree, I may not, I may disagree. and we all sort of chew that over and work it through. But if someone hasn't put the effort in, I won't put the effort in. If someone puts the effort in, I'll put the effort in.
And how would you describe the culture at Aldermore? Because obviously you've done fantastically. Sunday Times, best place to work.
Yeah.
Obviously really enjoy working there and with you. So how would you describe the culture that you've created?
So I am super proud of that. I mean, it's a 3-year journey whereby, colleague engagement was pretty low when I joined, and we've gone from sort of colleague net promoter score, I think it was -12 to +40 over a 3-year period. Lots of things have happened and been done by a lot of people to make that transition. Our culture, we've done a lot of work on our culture, is one whereby it's open. People feel able to speak up and say what's on their minds. They know that they will be listened to, and that if they raise things in like colleague surveys or whatever, people believe now, or about 80% of people believe now, that they will be listened to and action will be taken. But it's about an adult to adult open dialogue, and we've made that 2 ways. So there's a number of things behind that, but we call it a deal, which is, look, if you're telling us you want this in the workplace, good. This is what we want you to do in the workplace, and we come together, and that works very well. And it's about giving people opportunity, but also holding people to account. There's a performance framework. People will get well rewarded for doing a good job. We give people the opportunity to stretch, learn, grow. Some of that's around professionalism. Some of that's around things that are going on in people's lives. We have some amazing networks around gender or sexuality, or about becoming a parent for the first time, the impact that has on your life, or dealing with older parents and aging. These are run by colleagues of ours in their own time, with their own thinking, their own research. We give them some budget to do that, but those networks are amazing. And it's things like that, lots of little things that create an environment where, on the whole, people want to be. My job is to make it an environment where people want to be. For everyone else, they need to earn the right to be there. And that's I guess that's really the philosophy of the culture that we have. It's open, it's transparent, it's learning, it's developing. It's about being the best version of yourself and of the business. We look after our customers, we treat people well, but what we won't do also is tolerate bad behavior, and we call that out.
Well, it's clearly working for you, Stephen. And let's just, because there'll be people listening to this thinking about, is a career in finance for me? So what do you think makes somebody in finance successful? What attributes do you look for?
So I've spent, I'm in my early 50s now. So, and as you know, I joined at 16. So I've spent all my career in different banks. I don't think you necessarily need, I don't consider myself to be a banker per se. I consider myself to be a leader. I consider myself to be someone who creates an environment where people can give good financial support, advice, decent products to the average person on the street, or the average business on the street, who will understand those products, hopefully take those products until they're getting value in using those products. So I think you could apply the same thing to FMCG, for example, or retail, and you'll know that far better than me. You've excelled in that industry, but there's a lot of similarity in my view. I don't think you need to come from a certain background to be in finance. In fact, the more diversity there is, the better finance as an industry will be. It's got a lot better, certainly during my time, but there is much more to be done, particularly at a senior level. But finance can sound scary to people. It's not. And people shouldn't feel they need to have a maths A level or an economics degree to get into it. It's about, I go back to sort of one of the areas where I noticed it most. Some years ago, I was running sort of personal banking at Barclays, and I was in Cardiff at a call centre. And at the time, Cardiff had the highest rate of unemployment in the UK. And yet, when I was walking around this site, the phone was ringing and people weren't answering the phone, that's not a good thing. People weren't answering because we didn't have enough staff. And we thought, well, how can that be? Highest rate of unemployment, not enough people locally. And it turned out we were putting all sorts of artificial qualifications in place for recruiting, like hopefully a degree or at least 2 A levels. Well, if I want someone to answer the phone, you don't need any qualifications. I just want someone who wants to answer the phone and wants to help someone. So if I use that as an analogy, we changed lots of things as a result by taking away those qualifications criteria because they weren't relevant to the role. But it goes back to no one should feel they cannot work in financial services, in my viewpoint. There is a role for everybody, and no one should fear the word finance or large organizations. They can offer fantastic careers.
And quite often on this podcast, we talk about building careers and how people have built their career, and you've built a fantastic career. So do you just want to walk through for our listeners? You joined Barclays at 16, you started in the post room, you then got on their graduate program. Just talk us through your career, how it built up, and you've done work in Africa and India, and you went to Hoare Bank, which is a famous private bank,
Yeah.
and then Aldermore. So just take people on that journey that you went through so they can envisage how you do build your way to run an organization.
Yeah, I think so. There were probably, certainly in Barclays, there were 3 or 4 pivotal moments. I mean, I grew up in a branch environment, so I would argue that was real life. And some years later, when I was running personal banking, or people call that sort of retail banking, I guess, I would have lots of, I was working in a head office environment at the most senior level, and I would have graduates come to me and say, I want to be in this shiny tower and this. I'll say, great. If you want a big job in personal banking, you go and run a branch for 6 months first, because that's real life. And you will deal with all sorts of customers and all sorts of colleagues, and some will be younger than you, some will be older than you, and some have different things going in their lives, and you have to learn about leading. And there's no better place to do that in my world, a branch, in your case, probably a store or something. But they're not easy jobs, but you learn and you know what's going on in the real world. But so I grew up in that environment, and I say in Holloway Road, you saw some interesting characters there. And then through the graduate program, I got put into a head office environment. I was actually doing credit decisioning for very large corporates, and then so the first pivotal moment came where I got taken off the graduate program very quickly. I was only on it for about 18 months. And I wasn't really given a choice. I mean, I guess I was, but I was given a significant promotion. I jumped 3 grades, I think it was, in one go, to be a corporate manager. And in hindsight, I wish I'd stayed in the graduate program for longer, because I would have had the opportunity to rotate and do different things in a less pressured environment. Because when you're a graduate, you're not really under the same pressure to deliver or results or whatever else you're learning. But it's hard to say no when you get given the opportunity. I wasn't really given the opportunity to say no anyway, or at least I didn't think I could say no. So that was probably pivotal moment 1. But that then turned into pivotal moment 2, because in that role as a corporate manager, I was then offered a promotion again about 18 months later. I was doing quite well. I was very much aware there was a lot of people looking at me to see how well I would do, given the sort of the quick progression I'd made. I was probably the youngest in that sort of role, certainly in London. And you do sort of feel the pressure to perform and deliver. And I was offered a promotion to a more senior role, doing mainly the same sort of thing. But I said no. And I said no because I realized if I was going to do things more broadly, by this time I was sort of mid-20s. There were some people doing that role who had been doing it for 20, 30 years. Nothing wrong with that. They were great jobs and they were super happy, very good at what they did. But I knew I didn't want to do that. So I said no to the role. I gave up a promotion. I gave up the pay rise that went with it, which wasn't easy given, I was getting a house for the first time and stuff like that. And I went to see someone who had been much more senior than me. And I asked him if he could open up a door for me to go into the head office environment to do something strategic. Because my job was mainly tactical, talking to businesses about their financing solutions and putting products in place to meet those. And I won't mention this person, but I thought I can. His name is David Roberts, and he's currently chair of the Bank of England, of all things. But He opened up an opportunity for me, and I've been grateful to him since that time, to go into a strategy role. And that was really hard, Mark, because I knew nothing about strategy. I was very comfortable and a big fish in a small branch-based pond. And suddenly I was in a big head office environment, a big building, spending most of my day in front of a computer instead of most of my day in front of customers. I had no idea what I was doing. And I found that really hard for about 4 or 5 months. And eventually I kind of got my head around it, and I had a good team around me who were patient. I mean, they're very different to me because they'd all been to university and high flyers and fast track, and I was very different to that. And I felt that. That's more about me feeling it as opposed to them making me feel that way. And I was about to sort of walk out of the environment and say, I just can't do this. I want to go back to what I did. And for whatever reason, the day I was going to say that to my boss at the time, who I'm still friendly with, I had a good day and I didn't say that. And they then sent me on secondment to McKinsey for a year, and I learned a lot from that. But that put me into quite a fast track world in sort of the head office environment. And then I was offered a promotion there, which I then said no to again. And I said no because I wanted to get back to a customer facing role. I wanted to be in a leadership position. And I had the opportunity to also go abroad for the first time. And I ended up going in to run most of East Africa for Barclays. And I knew nothing about East Africa, and I knew nothing about different cultures and norms like that. And at the same time, I had a partner and a very young baby. And I loved it. And I learned an awful lot about how a bank works end to end. I mean, I was used to sort of giving someone a £10 million loan, not thinking where the funding for that came from. Well, in Africa, in some of the much smaller organizations, all part of a big, larger group, I remember doing a leveraged buyout for a mobile phone company for $100 million. Well, if I was going to lend them $100 million, I had to find $100 million to lend them. So I learned how a balance sheet works. At the same time, I was living in a world where HIV was rampant, and at the time there was no medication for it. And I saw the cultural stigma associated with that. So you saw how people behaved in different environments, and I learned an awful lot. And there was a leadership team there who were very good. I mean, look, they were all male and all white, hardly representative of the society in which we were operating. We were the largest company in parts of East Africa, and thankfully that has now changed. And the leadership teams there now are much more representative of the societies in which they serve. But I learned an awful lot. I learned, look, frankly, it was easy for me. I had a job to get on with. It was not easy for my partner because she was halfway around the world. I had a job to get on with and people to meet through that, and she had to find her own sort of social network and how things like a water bill worked in parts of Africa and stuff. But it was a fabulous learning experience, and that and strategy, I don't think I would be able to do the jobs I've done in the last 10 years if I hadn't had both those learning opportunities. But the interesting thing with both is, one, twice I turned down a promotion. And that was not easy because I saw someone get those jobs and I thought I was better than them. Not that that's important necessarily. I missed the pay rise they got. And on both occasions, someone opened up a door for me. Yeah, look, they didn't knock on my door to give me that opportunity. I reached out to them. And there's other times in my career, my life, and I've done that, or I want some perspectives or views or help, and I've reached out to people. But they were the big pivotal moments, people taking a chance on you, opening a door. But you've got to take it yourself as well. And sometimes the short-term step up is not as good as the potential long run.
And talk to us about leaving Barclays. So you were 30 years at Barclays, so you knew it all, and you've been fantastically successful. But then you left to take on a CEO role at a bank, privately owned, that I assume looks after incredibly wealthy people. So tell us about that. Tell us about that move. What prompted you to move, and how did you find the move?
So that was a big thing for me. As you rightly point out, I've been there an awful long time. It's all I'd known. I mean, I think I'm probably still am one of the most, well, certainly the most senior person to have worked in every part of the Barclays group. And Barclays is a wonderful organisation. But a couple of things happened. One is, look, I was the only person at my level in the organisation who had come from my sort of background. And I'm not sure they tried to make me feel this way, but I definitely felt different. And I saw people progress primarily, at least at that time, from a certain socioeconomic background. And I didn't come from that background. And I felt there was a slight club mentality around that. And maybe that's more about how I felt. But I definitely felt that way. And I started to feel uncomfortable about that. And I also knew, as part as a result of that, I wasn't going to progress further. I mean, look, there's only 2 or 3 bigger jobs in the organisation, and good people in those roles. So there's nothing wrong with that. And I thought at that time, if I'm going to do something different, now's a time. And if I'm going to do something different, then do something very different. And that's what I did. And I wanted to be a standalone chief executive, because everyone kept telling me it's quite different when you're a divisional chief executive, because ultimately the buck stops with you. And I'd been super senior in a very large organisation, so I wanted to try something much smaller to see whether I could operate in that environment, or whether I needed the machinery around me to be effective. So I went from one environment, to your point, something very different, to a wonderful organisation called Hoare Co, which is the UK's oldest bank, actually older than the Bank of England. But in some ways, it's very contemporary. I mean, it's got very good, now at least, very good digital banking, amazingly strong values through time. And to your point, they do look after some fabulously wealthy people, but it's not just about wealthy people. It's about, are they, I mean, the philosophy they have, and I really liked it, was good bankers, so good at what you do, but as importantly, and maybe even more importantly, good people. And it is about people who, I mean, I used to look at things like, well, whether we lend someone some money there or get in business with someone. In many cases, it was, if there was a problem, could they step in? And nearly always the answer to that was yes, because they had the financial resources to do so. But the really important question is, would they? And I always used to find out, what do their customers say about them? What do their staff say about them? What do their suppliers say about them? Because that way you get a view as to whether people treat others well. And if they didn't treat others well, then we didn't do business with them. And it was family owned. And that's an interesting thing, whereby people who sort of, I guess to some extent, report to you within the organisation, and you have an input into their pay and rations and so forth, but they can also fire you. And I guess I learned the meaning of the word alignment, that if we were aligned on things, then things generally worked out pretty well. If they didn't, that's when problems arose. So we would meet up every week, every Thursday morning, have a cup of coffee, and just talk through what was on my mind, what was on their mind. But they are, they're now the 13th generation of ownership, and I mean, that's quite something. They really are about preserving that organisation for the future generations, and it's quite impressive how, I hope I've helped them along the way, whereby they've taken something that you could argue is 300 years old, and therefore, and it is steeped in tradition, but also it's quite contemporary. Yeah, I loved it. I really did. And the client base is truly amazing, not just because of the interest in how those people, most of whom are entrepreneurs in their own right, but also how much those entrepreneurs do, often discreetly, to support society. It was a great time there.
And then you moved to your current role in Aldermore. So talk to us about that. Why did you decide to move to this role, and tell us about the role now?
Yeah, so I didn't I wasn't looking to move, and I had a number of approaches about things. And actually, I said no to Aldermore twice, but I said yes on the third occasion, for three reasons, really. One is, Hoare Co was an organisation of a certain size. I will never go beyond a certain size. So there was more ambition with Aldermore. It was a bigger business, but something you could also still get your arms around and have impact on. And I enjoyed having the impact, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But it's a decent business, decent size, with ambition, with both the UK board, and it's got a parent company, First Rand, Africa's biggest bank, and I sit on their group executive, but they are arm's length, so no one reports there. And like that. They're good owners of this business. They let the UK people get on and run it. They recognise they don't know the UK necessarily, but they're a good business in their own right. But they've got ambition with firepower to deploy, and that's an unusual mix, actually. And they were going to give me space. I didn't want to go back and be a divisional CEO again. So I guess I wanted, because I am, but I'm not. We don't operate that way. So I joined, and it was a wrench leaving where I was. But I felt I'd made a good impact there. I'm still friendly with the family. I'm still friendly with the chairman from that time. But I decided to move. And 3.5 years in, I'm still happy with the move. We've doubled the profitability of the organisation that time, to the points we made earlier. We've gone from bottom decile for colleague engagement to top decile, Sunday Times, top 10 places to work. Our Glassdoor rate has gone from 1 to 4. We've got nearly 1 million customers now. We're investing in technology, making it a safer place to operate and grow. So that's pretty good. It's got interesting lines of business. So we do. What I like about it really is its purpose, and we call it backing people to do more in life and business. And we're a specialist bank, and what that means is we help people where the high street bank will not. It doesn't mean they have bad credit. I've got no desire to do that, but it is helping people who may have slightly unusual circumstances to get a foot on the property ladder, for example, or to grow their business when others don't look beyond what a computer scorecard will say. And unusual circumstances might be someone with 2 jobs. That's not that unusual anymore, but 2 payslips doesn't compute with the high street bank system. We support professional landlords to continue to grow. And by the way, we do check that they treat their tenants well. If they don't, we won't operate with them. It might be someone who's gone through a bereavement and is struggling to adapt to their changing circumstance, and we help them do that. Or it might be someone who's lost their job, getting back on their feet. And we find some amazing things. We just financed, for example, a low carbon housing project. It's fascinating to see how that operates. We did a lot of student accommodation, and we financed a lot of football clubs. And one of you think, what's football got to do with purpose? Well, actually, if you look at, we did a report recently at Norwich City Football Club, and we've worked out with them that every pound that we support them with on financing, that puts £13 into their local economy. And those local economies, I'm a long-suffering Spurs fan, and it's bustling around there on match day, but outside of match day, it's not. And without that match day revenue, those communities don't operate. So it's about what we do. I was drawn by that, and what's interesting is that when I joined and I met people, particularly lower down customer facing, they're the best I've ever seen. And they are driven by wanting to help people be the best they can be. If they go home at night, and Saturday night, and they come at night talking to their parents, or I'm talking to my kids, saying that you've helped someone get a house of their own for the first time, you feel good about that.
Yeah. And something else that you must feel good about, and I just want to spend a little time exploring with you, is the work that you've done on social mobility. So
yes.
Helping people from less prosperous backgrounds get on in life. And you do that work now. You're a chair at BITC, looking after employment and skills. You also work with Justin Greening on social mobility, and you supported the government as well until quite recently. So you've done lots in the space, but tell us what drives you. What makes you passionate about helping people get on from more deprived backgrounds, and how have you done that?
So it goes back to my own personal experience, which I talked about, and I think there is. I don't like using the word unfairness, because I think there is unfairness there, but to a certain extent you can create fairness. But you do need the aspiration. You do need. I don't think people are necessarily born with aspiration, but you've got to show people aspiration. And I don't think anyone should not have the. I mean, that's what social mobility is. Is irrespective of your circumstance of birth, that should not dictate your outcome in life. And I feel very strongly about that. It's about giving people opportunity. And that's not about saying, well, you've got the ability to go to university if you want to. Well, that's not easy for everybody. For some, it's very scary. And you don't know people around you who have done that. You don't have the confidence. You don't know what it means. And we see that in job interviews. If you've never been to a job interview before, or you don't know anybody who has, that's really scary. You don't know what to wear. And I go back to what I learned in Cardiff when we took away those qualifications criteria. It had nothing to do with the job. What we soon realized is we reached into those communities whereby there was some fabulous talent, really fabulous talent, who we would never have had access to before. But even with that, we had to put support in place. So it's like, well, this is what a job interview looks like. This is how you should think about it. Give you some coaching before you go into that interview, making sure people in that interview process look like they did, or maybe came from backgrounds like they did if we had people like that. It was about making sure, well, how will you get to the interview? In many cases, they didn't have money for the bus fare or the train fare. Good, so we supported that. If in rural areas in particular, the buses may not run or run on time, so making sure they had plenty of time to get somewhere. People might say, well, do it online. Well, you assume they've got the kit, you assume they've got the broadband, you assume they've got a room where they can have a conversation in private. In many cases, they haven't. So you've got to create that environment. When they do get a job, it's things like, well, we're going to eat for lunch tomorrow. How are you going to afford that? How do you make sure you get up in the morning and get to work? How are you going to manage your financial life from 1 month payday to the next? So it's putting quite basic criteria in front. But why was that important? Goes back to, we found some brilliant people. Many of those have gone on to, I think by the time I left Barclays, about 2,000 people have come in through an apprenticeship scheme. By the way, at Aldermore, I'll come back to the second, but 10% of our staff are apprenticeships. Great energy people. And most of those go on to progress their careers, real jobs, real wages, real prospects. And they are becoming role models in their own communities. The biggest thing for me is that I've got great talent. The fact that they've sort of got a better life as a result. Look, that's a nice to have. The must have is, I need people to do a good job. And I was struggling to recruit them, and now I'm not. And we spend every single penny of our apprenticeship levy. I hired someone, and I said to him, do not waste a penny. We need to make sure we put it to good use. And that's exactly what he's done. And yeah, that's what's important to me. It's about making sure that everyone knows the opportunity they have in front of them, can take the opportunity should they wish to do so. And it's not for everybody, but there should be no artificial barriers in place.
Well, I have to say, Stephen, your story is truly inspiring. The way that from the post room in Barclays at 16, you've built the most amazing career in Barclays and then Hoare, and then obviously with Aldermore now, and what you've achieved when you're there, how you help people in society, not only through the bank and your work and being recognised as one of the best places to work, but also what you're doing on social mobility. So it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I wish you continued success, and I know our listeners will have really enjoyed hearing your story. Thank you.
Thanks very much for having me.
To listen to more episodes and find out how to get happy in your working life, head to workl.co. Work happier.